Welcome to Now We Are Talking TV. Today we are joined by Dr Mark Jamison, who is Director of the Public Utility Research Centre at the University of Florida. He has also provided a submission to the National Broadband Network Regulatory Review and has talked to key industry and business groups. Dr Jamison, thank you so much for joining us today on Now We Are Talking TV.
My pleasure.
Dr Jamison, last week you presented an ACCC conference on what do regulators need to know. Well, what do regulators need to know in the NBN world?
Well, what we have to understand, I think, about the NBN world is that we don't know what the future looks like. Not only do we not know that very well, sometimes we don't even know what the real questions are for today. So I think a key thing for regulators to think about, and the industry and any other stakeholder as well, is that we need to kind of step back and watch and see how things are going to evolve, how things are really going to work, and then we can try to apply regulations if they're needed.
You also told the conference that regulation is disappointing people at a rate they can endure. What did you mean by that?
Well, regulation by commissions like the ACCC or any commission around the world were really set up to provide technical answers. How do we get prices that people really are able to pay and find affordable? How do we make sure services are available? That's what regulation really was all about. But in today's world, where we have to step back, we're actually keeping people from getting those answers right now. And people aren't going to like that. They're going to be disappointed. We just have to make sure we do that at a rate which they're willing to let the system evolve and let that learning go on before they simply say, well, let's have regulation, even if it's not the right thing to do.
As you know, in Australia, Telstra's competitors are calling for separation of the company. You have said that in the US they've tried every flavour of separation and it has failed. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, there was one basic problem. There are several, but there's one basic problem, and that is that for separation, you have to have somewhat of a stable world where you can say separation makes sense right here at this point, and that's the way the world will work. But when technology is changing and customers are changing and markets are changing, we can't know exactly where all the pieces can come apart and try to put them back together. So it's that dynamic change that makes the functional or structural separations very difficult to make work at all in today's world.
And what do you see as would be the best system or the best outcome here in Australia?
Well, I'm not an expert in Australia, but what I would like to see around the world is for people to let the markets work, let the companies that provide services, the customers that buy them, all the players that have good information and know what they really want, make their decisions and have those kind of competitive markets tell us where things should go.
What in your view is the best way to encourage competition and investment in next generation networks?
Well, I think both of those things go very much hand in hand. All the research we have on networks and investment in them and expansion of them is that competition is one of the real keys. It's not subsidized competition, but competition amongst competitors that really are commercially viable and are providing services to customers.
How do open access networks work, and how can we encourage competition on them?
Well, basically an open access network is simply saying that there are some pieces of the network that really there's only going to be one there. That we're not going to have multiple connections to homes, for example, is one thing that people often think about. And so we allow multiple competitors to have access to that piece of the network, and then competition then is for everything else that goes on. And that's how those systems are typically conceptualized and how they tend to work. So you can have competition in other parts of the network, even though maybe that piece of the network's not going to be competitive.
Dr Jamison, what is your advice to the ACCC?
Well, it's kind of like what I was saying earlier, that we're at a point in time where we really have to try and understand exactly what are the important questions and what does the future look like. And for that, we need to let things play out for a while. We need to let the system work, let the markets work. And I think that's what I really advise a lot of regulators around the world now in telecommunications, is to let the markets do their job.
And what are some examples we're seeing in regards to regulation internationally?
Well, competition is really the key around the world. We're seeing the main focus in most countries is how do we ensure that markets are allowed to work, how do we ensure that there is competition. And I think that that's exactly the right way to go.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us on Now We Are Talking TV.
My pleasure.